Call it fluff.
Welcome back to the Northeast Way Q Source podcast. We are on location at Smooth Joe. My veteran guests, Thingamabob, Dowry, Poppy, and Jingle back with me, Money Pit. For one of the last chapters at the end of the year, we're quadrant 4, Q4.8, Accountability.Team. Today's Poppy's birthday. We're holding him accountable. He was late for the Q. We let him know about it, but Poppy was the guest for accountability the first time around. And so similarly, we're talking about accountability in team setting. Glad that Jingle's back. Jingle had some good responses. Everybody took notes when you who watched the video like we did when you talked last week about being the world's best middle school soccer coach.
Exactly.
I believe.
So this week, accountability team, setting and maintaining high standards with the team. So essentially, it's really a conversation about standards. We talk about accountability, but really, what are we holding people accountable to? Right, the thing that we're holding them accountable to, the standard that we set, and kind of a highlight of where the discussion's going. You know, the standard you set is not always the standard you say. You can say a lot of things. You can put a lot of things in your employee manual. You can write fancy things on the wall. But your standards are what you live. The standards are the culture of the organization, not just what you say. Now, hopefully, if you're a good leader, you're a good organization, there's some overlap between the two. But accountability is really about maintaining standards in a team. So quick thoughts about just high-level standards, holding people accountable.
I mean, I think it comes down to, like they say in this chapter, the Q has got to set and exceed the standards that are set in order for a team to follow. So I think the leader has to excel so that there's a built of trust within that team. And I mean, even with his cue this morning, you know, his voice was louder. Mm-hmm. He set a cadence. Mm-hmm. So he set the standard for us to follow that routine and set of exercises. So it's as simple as something like that.
Yeah. So there's some consistency helps with standards, I guess, is the point I'm hearing from that for sure. Any other thoughts? Accountability? Just general thoughts like...
Yeah, I'm interested in everyone else's thoughts here, but I think one of the tricky parts with accountability is just, it's one thing to have like the target, the outcome, and obviously like we would all say like you need to be flexible as a new data is coming into a situation and you're recognizing, hey, the expectation was inappropriate, right? Like we need to modify, we got new information. I mean, we do that when we lead workouts, but also there's that other side of accountability where it is like clearly there was a barrier that didn't get overcome by the individual, right? Like something that happened got in the way, they didn't perform. And I always feel like that's the toughest situation to like break apart because you don't always know, is that motivation? Was there a life situation that got in the way? Is this a pattern of living? Right? Is this something I can coach and encourage them out of? Is it self-defeat, self-sabotage? I always feel like it gets so messy in that space. And sometimes outside of work environments, it's been far easier for me to like, so what's going on? And people open up. But like in a work environment, because people have salaries tied to it, there's all these defense mechanisms. And my experience is it's in some cases in a bigger organization, it's really hard to get at what got in the barrier. And so then it's like, does everybody else on the team step in and fill the gap? Do you decide that this is the issue we're going to have, you know, we're going to draw attention to right now? I always feel like that is the idea of accountability being an objective standard. I really like. It gets really messy and really subjective in that situation in my experience. It's easier on the soccer field. It's easier running around with you guys on a workout.
Well, I'd say what makes accountability, the objective part of accountability, easy is when there's money involved. I actually find it easier to hold someone accountable when there's a contract, when there's money involved, versus in a volunteer setting what am I holding you accountable to? You know, you don't have to be here, right? We're just kind of throwing our word around, and people take their word more seriously when they've got money on the line versus their buddy who maybe is or isn't counting on them. So let's break that apart. There's a couple different things that you've raised. So let's hit the first one. Kind of at the end of the chapter, Dredd says that the Q shouldn't give up on the willing. All right, so really what Jingle's saying is, so you have someone that doesn't live up to the standard. What's a leader to do when someone doesn't live up to the standard? And you, obviously, as a great leader, are saying that there's something more going on behind the scenes, typically, when someone doesn't live up to the standard, right? So then what do you do? Do you just ignore it? Or as a leader, do you press in to see what's going on, to see if you can get them above the standard? So great question. Let's just stop there for a second. What do you do when someone's below the standard?
So I'll say, especially in the setting like as we work out, everybody has their own standard too. Because like you set the standard for the Q, but like you say, it's a volunteer army. So everybody has their own expectations of what they want to do, what they're trying to accomplish. Everybody has their different goals and things. So there's a fine line, I believe, on how you can push. Because we even say like it's push yourself, but don't hurt yourself. Right, so where's that line? It's a very thin line, right? Still, like you as a Q or as people like just working out together, we try to push and encourage other people to do their best. But there's just so much you can do in that setting because of that volunteer army effect.
So, I mean, you just mentioned something about, it's easier when there's money involved, right?
Well, I think it's easier to hold someone accountable, but I think Jingle's right. It's not always easy to press into what's going on with them personally.
Correct. That's the key, I think. So in any kind of standard. So it's easier when you have a contract, like you mentioned, right? Not necessarily money related or anything like that. I can think back to having an initial counseling of all people leaders in my unit, right? All squad leaders in my unit. And you have an initial counseling, that's the expectations, right? Accountability, hey, know where your men are at all times, know what they're doing, etc. And that way you can have that conversation for if somebody doesn't meet those standards that we've set as a team, because we all agreed on them when you signed that contract, then you can have that conversation. But only when you're really having that conversation, after you say, hey, I'm noticing that you are not meeting this standard, whatever that is in that initial counseling. Let's talk about that. And that's when you get to the root of the problem, right? If the individual that's supposed to be leading other men or other subordinates, it's not meeting a standard for some reason that makes the team not meet the standard, then only that conversation is going to happen when you can, okay, I get it, you're dealing with stuff at home. Where can we help you so that we can meet the standard as a team, right? Or it's like, hey, there's really no reason why you're not meeting the standard, because you can find that out in that conversation too.
Right.
But only through that conversation with that individual that's not meeting the standard is when you can find that out, right? And then hold them accountable, or hold the team accountable and say, hey, we got to help our brother out.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But somebody's going to be held accountable, right?
Yeah.
So that we can all meet the standard as a team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, in the beginning of the chapter talks about there being this kind of group accountability, right? And so, the leader obviously has to hold a standard, but I think the leader can benefit by creating a culture where the group holds the standard, right? Where the culture becomes the standard rather than just because I said so. As a leader, I can say, I said so, that's the standard, but it's not always the same as when the culture says, this is how we do things. It becomes a lot more obvious when someone dips below the standard, and then now it's not just one person saying, hey, I said so. The group is like, hey, buddy, we're trying to get somewhere together.
Does your culture need to match your standard, though? I mean, or do you make accommodations to have that culture meet the standard.
Oh, great question. Let's talk about it. What do you think?
I mean, I think like even Jingle says, you kind of you have an off table conversation with someone who's not meeting standard, helping the team out, not pushing that oar with a rowboat kind of thing that he talks about in this chapter, and you can have that conversation that's one-on-one, that's a little more personable, that a person will be more open and to express what might be going on with them. I mean, there's mornings you can tell when guys come and they're just not feeling it. They're just they're there because they need that exercise, but they're more there just to have that fellowship. And I think that's what's kind of key is for not just the Q, but the packs that are in that workout to recognize it and just cheer them up, give them a pump with your hand, and you accommodate that workout per se, just to make sure that they stay with it and are felt like they're welcome, and maybe they can open up and say, hey, I just had a rough week. I appreciate you kind of being there for me, and sometimes you don't even have to say anything. So
yeah, I mean, I was thinking the same thing. So in a different way, in a professional light, right? So one, we think about accountability, and oftentimes we're like, we kind of cringe at the moment that we have to get held accountable, right? And we cringe to have to hold someone accountable. But the positive part of it is, like, the day that you're not doing well and someone leads you well by holding you accountable in the right way, say what's going on. Yeah. Like, I had a day like that yesterday. I was in a funk, man. It wasn't, I was just down. I wish someone would have called me. I was working in my own office. I wish someone would have seen me and said, dude, what's up? You've dipped below the standard. Because I needed someone to, one, call me out, to jar me out of that funk, and probably two, say, hey, well, let's talk through it. Because it ended up being a small deal, but, lots of things dip you below the standard. The right team with the right culture uses the standard to pull people to where they.
Yeah, hardly ever are you going to put yourself out of
Yeah.
not meeting the standard, right? Because you're comfortable, right, where you're at. Right?
Even if you're complaining,
Right.
Yeah.
I think the trick is like when somebody shows up that's not meeting the standard, right? That's also part of the culture. That's also
Yeah,
a
that's
standard that we hold in F3. Leave no man behind, right? So that's in a sense, the accountability comes to that, right? It's like, okay, I'm not going to leave this man behind, but at the same token, let me see what's going on, and then if somebody is just slacking, then we can maybe call them out, start doing some of the other things that are necessary. But you hit on a point about agreeing on that standard together, right? Give them some, that's again going just because that's what I'm familiar with the military concept. When I did the initial counseling, when I took over that unit, I did the initial counseling with all the squad leaders at the same time. So every single one of them was held to the same standard, and part of the meeting, the counseling at that moment was, hey, is there anything in here that anyone in this room doesn't feel that
What do you mean? Tell me what that means.
like some of the things, the first one is know where all your people are at all times. Know what they are doing. Keep accountability of your equipment. Know
So
how
first
much
you said,
equipment you
is there
have.
anything you don't agree with, basically?
Yeah,
inside
is there
this?
anything in
Right.
here that anyone in this room doesn't agree
Gotcha.
that you should be doing as a squad leader, as a people leader, right? And then we discuss it, right?
Yeah.
But once it's done and it's on paper, you sign that paper. I actually had to bring that paper out during in the deployment. Right? I overseas when something happened. I'm like, okay, let me bring this counseling out and talk to X. Say, hey, which one? What? I don't think you're meeting this right here. Tell me about this, right?
Yeah.
But it's nice to have that on paper and hey, look, we agreed to this. We talked about this.
I think I'm glad you hit on that, because there's a big difference between I told you so,
Yeah.
and you're supposed to do it because I told you so, and then
agree.
willingly say, yes, I agree. let's do that together. I'm going to live up to that, right? It's because when someone works for you professionally, they have to do it because you told them so, if in the hierarchical chain.
Right.
But we all know that doesn't. There's moments in which when you hold someone accountable to what you said, but they didn't want to, that doesn't always go over so well.
Yeah.
Because they're like in their mind they're thinking, but I didn't want to do that. I didn't agree with that. So John Maxwell talks about the law of buy-in and the importance of buy-in, and so you guys had a formal process for the contract in the Army, but I feel like kind of a hack I've adopted over the last few years is whenever I need to hold someone accountable to something, even if it's because I said, I don't move forward until I get them to agree. Whatever way I got to do to get them to agree, because one day you're gonna have to hold them accountable, and it sucks to say, well, you didn't do what I said. Well, I didn't want to do what you said. Versus, hey, bro, I thought we talked about this. Yeah, you're right. Because if someone is being held accountable to what they'd agreed on, they almost wonder what took you so long to hold them accountable to it.
Yeah.
And that's a great point, and that's something that I do like in every project. Whenever we start a project, I meet with my team, right? And the first thing we do is say, hey, we state the goals, and then I ask them like, how do you guys want to do this? I don't start by saying, hey, this is my plan on how to do this. I'm like, how you guys want to do it? Because at the end of the day, they're the ones going to do boots on the ground, doing the work. I just want to make sure that whatever they're doing matches my budget, right? So like, I always start with that. And then it's like you say, it's easier to tell them, hey, you're driving off course right here. Like, let's go back in course. And they would be more willingly doing it because of this. The reason that it's their plan, it's not my plan.
So let's put just a couple final thoughts on the concept of standards. Well, the chapter says standards are meaningless if the Q will not enforce them. And so the difference between a stated standard versus a cultural standard. So let's just put a couple thoughts on that before we close this one out, because I think that's we've kind of been implying that throughout the conversation, but I think it's worth really restating, and we need to remind ourselves as leaders, you can state whatever you want, but if the culture doesn't match it, right, you're likely not going to get the buy-in and everyone living up to that standard.
Yeah, it's hard for me to articulate the example on the F3 context, but in the corporate context, leadership can say all they want that we have a culture or our standard. The words are, we have a culture of, innovation and all that, right? But if in practice, if the actual action is, hey, when you start innovating something, hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock,
They shut you down.
that's no longer a culture of, so the culture, it doesn't match the standard, right? That becomes the standard. That's the one example.
So
that
what's
I've
the
lived through,
long-term effect of the group? Is it innovation?
Motivation, and it's
Right.
People leave the
So
company.
they want the standard to be innovation, but that's not really what's lived out
That's right, exactly.
because it's not enforced.
No,
Right.
it's in fact the opposite. Right.
The opposite is enforced.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. I guess it would be the same thing in F3 if you got up every morning and didn't go through the routine that we have, right? If we just showed up and one day I got up to Q and went, we're not doing anything, we're just going to talk. You know what I mean? And then it continued that way. I'm like, this is not F3 anymore. This is something else. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
End of the table. Any thoughts?
I'm good.
Maybe one final thought is sometimes what I've noticed in life, and I thought this was where you're going, is like you can have moments where leadership or the culture has gotten stale, or out of touch with the mission, or it's just not flexible enough. It's not adaptive. I mean, honestly, organizations a lot of times exist for their own survival,
right.
not for their mission, right, or for the people that are working for them. But sometimes what you have happen is that it's, giving a workout, sometimes it's one of the packs, it's one of the people that shows up that then is the one that pushes things because the energy they interject in the situation, the new information that they bring in the workplace. Like, I mean, sometimes it's a nice thing. Nice might be the evolutionary thing, the thing that compels change is having the space to recognize the insight and the energy of somebody that's a participant that they're bringing into the situation.
Or
and
someone
going,
new to the situation.
Right. We need to adapt, right? We need to respect what's being brought to the table here, and the culture itself needs to change. Like, it's a criticism of maybe the culture did get flat, maybe it got stale, maybe it wasn't on point anymore. And I think a good organization has some space for that.
Yeah, and the tricky part is that that's not easy to hear. It's not easy to hear for the leader in the team or whatever, and even in like just one-on-one relationship. Let's say just a friendship or a marriage. It's not easy to hear that you're not meeting the standard that you set. So you had to be open to receive that as well, right? I had to be open to say, when my wife tells me, "Hey, you said you were going to do this, but you didn't."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I have to be able to receive that input and say, okay, I need to do better this time, right? Or something.
Yeah, I mean, to wrap it up, in the Q source methodology, the point of leadership is to lead to advantage, meaning something better. And that's oftentimes what you have to ask yourself: how serious am I about getting somewhere better? Because you find yourself in the stagnated, stale rut that's not getting there, and we can either fight for the comfort or we can fight for what we say we want. And sometimes, and maybe half the time, they're at odds with each other. So, gents, thanks for joining me for an impromptu roundtable. See you at the Q Source table.